FiiO is on a roll with all their headphone releases. Feels like every month they throw a new headphone on the market and see what sticks there. And to be fair, they all have been received quite well. Maybe with the exception of the FT5, which was a bit of a matter of taste because of its dark tuning, but generally they are good headphones, especially the newly released FT1, which has been reviewed quite positively. Now they released the FT1 Pro, which follows the same design scheme, but is a planar magnetic open back headphone, which is priced around €200, which makes it fit into the same price category as the all-time recommendation, the Edition XS, which was priced around €500, and already at this price point it was a top contender in this range and below obviously, but now it has been reduced to €300. So both of these are priced pretty similarly, which begs the question, which one is the choice for you? I bought both of these, and if you want to know my thoughts and how I would compare these two, then you should watch this review. So let's go right into it with build quality. So FiiO is pretty much known for releasing well-built stuff, and basically all of their recent releases had no issues with the materials and made a very solid appearance. And it's no different here. The FT1 Pro, in comparison to the closeback FT1, does not have any wood on the ear cups, but very solid feeling. Plastic and metal where it counts, this being the hinges and in the headband, of course. And you can actually see the planar driver inside there. Yeah, just looks cool on the light. From the stitching to the screws, everything seems to be solidly made and to be a sturdy construction. There's some clicking going on and some stretching sounds when I'm moving the ear cups. I do not know if I can really replicate this. It's this here now. Yeah, there is just some noise from the construction when you're like moving it around more violently when I'm moving the ear cups or when I'm moving my head or when I'm talking, but it does not bother me that much and it already seems to go away. I also listened to Gadgetry Tech's video, who by the way is a great reviewer, go watch him. And I do have to mention that I do not have any further issues with the build quality here. So there is no loose bass port, which is this little thing here, like it is in his video. And I also do not have any crinkling in the driver. So basically everything was pretty much fine here. Just to note that here, because I've seen this in his review. Looking at the XS, there's no question who wins in build quality, because the XS, although I do like its design, I just have a weak point for these egg-shaped Hifimans. I kind of like how they look, but in comparison to the FT1 Pro, this feels like a toy. And I really hope they stop selling headphones with that goddamn awful headband. It's heavier, it feels more bulky, and I'm not sure how confident I am in the hinges. Although they are metal, the whole construction feels rushed together. And yeah, granted, I do not have any issues with quality control here, and everything works and looks like it should. So props to Hifiman here. Talking about comfort, well, the FT1 got good notes in its comfort department and was seen as a comfortable headphone by many listeners, being relatively light and not putting much pressure on your ears with good padding, although people were modding the headband and I can tell why. But let's go step by step here. Indeed, the FT1 Pro is light too, and with the pretty low to modest clamping force, you should not experience a lot of issues here. There's the sports mesh inside that helps with sweating, and combined with the open design, this really is ideal if you sweat easy. The mesh also feels high quality and does not feel scratchy or rough to me. The headband has these patches filled with padding, and since the FT1 Pro is again light, it usually is enough. but I did experience the famous hotspot in the middle of your head, and I had to reposition the headphone several times until I found the perfect spot. Because even though it's not a heavy weight, the low clamping pressure leaves all the weight distribution to the headband, which again works mostly, but it is a point to consider. And also, it does feel somewhat clunky on your head, which is a minor thing, but people were praising the FT1 design as if it's a revelation in comfort. And while it's fine, there are headphones which do it better. Nevertheless, I will still say it's comfortable, but not perfect. I think that is also really far from being perfect is the stupid headband on the Edition XS, which is hard with the cheapest non-memory foam cushion they could find, and which works even less because the XS basically has no clamping force at all. And all the weight is distributed by the headband, which in my case leads to pain in the center here and me having to find a position that works in an acceptable way. Which I'm fair, I do usually find, and then it's fine. But please, Hifiman, use a suspension strap like you do with the more expensive models, and it would instantly upgrade the Edition XS onto a whole nother level in that case. It's also a huge headphone, and I have these sliders all the way in, and it fits, but if it was only a little bit bigger, I could not use the Edition XS. I do think the pads are fine. Since there's no clamping force, the padding does not really have much to do, but still, I do think it's fine. There is also a similar mesh on the inside here and fake leather on the outside, like the FT1 Pro has, but the pads feel higher quality on the FT1 Pro, especially the foam inside just feels better. Onto the section everyone is waiting for, sound. And let's start with the bass frequencies. The FT1 Pro has a relatively neutral sound profile with a planar typical good and very clean low bass extension that sounds a bit compressed in a good way, meaning it's tight and really fast. It hits, then stays just long enough to not sound weird, and then it gets cut off, so there's no slow or fading fat bass that interferes with the other frequencies. There is also a bit of a boost in the very low frequencies, so around 40 to 60 Hz, which is only a small section, and it has a surprising amount of force in it. It's not thick and bassy in the usual sense, again, it's tuned relatively neutral, but it hits damn hard, and the really low notes on a bass guitar, the lower beats in industrial and kick drums can take big advantage of that. It's really damn visceral and a good example of what planar bass can do. The mid bass and upper bass then, so the area from 60 Hz to 250 Hz, is more flat, but which does not mean thin. Instruments never sound like they miss some of their body, but if you want a more bassy open back and you do not want to use EQ, the FT1 Pro is just not the right tool, I think. On the plus side, it never gets boomy or makes bass notes sound washed together. And if you favor clarity, and to be honest, for my ears, the bass here is really strong with some songs, which make use of that little boost in the lower section. And it never really sounds bass-like. It's just not exaggerated, and sounds more realistic quantity-wise. Quality-wise, it's absolutely fantastic. And in comparison, the Edition XS has a somewhat thicker bass with a bigger emphasis from 100 Hz onwards until the lower mid-range, I guess around 300 Hz, which makes it warmer and fuller sounding. You still have very good low bass extension, it just sounds less tight, less neutral, and I gotta admit, the FiiO does punch you in the face a bit more. Means although both sound great in the bass department, the FiiO does exhibit more tactility and sounds more clean and controlled. But again, the XS just sounds fuller and bigger in the bass department, and it has this bass warmth and deep rumble that works quite well with a lot of music, because it has this kind of epic feel to it where the FiiO is more neutral in comparison. Mid-range on the FT1 Pro is pretty flat and slightly forward until the typical Hifiman dip appears, which the FiiO also has, meaning a recession or between 1000 Hz and 2000 Hz Hz that makes music sound more spaced out and less in your face sounding. Overall, the mid-range here is also what I would describe as neutral but not boring. Instruments and vocals do not sound thin or plasticky. They have enough body, and also listening to the mid-range, you will notice that the FT1 Pro is really resolving. The separation here is fantastic, and even really quiet parts are audible, which in fact is often attributed to planar drivers just being inherently more resolving and again compressing the audio signal a bit. But still, the FT1 Pro does that and not sounding planar like. And even with the bit of forwardness here, vocals are not shouty, although sometimes they border on being a bit intense, but it's still below my threshold here, and it's fine. In my eyes, this is just neutral sound done well. I especially like electric guitars here because they can easily sound too clean and too harsh, and the FT1 Pro does not do that. They just sound right like they should. Listening to the Edition XS, again, the emphasis in the upper bass and lower mid-range is instantly noticeable. So music sounds fuller, maybe somewhat lush, and because of this bigger bass presence, from time to time the XS borders on being a bit boomy, which the FD1 Pro never does. And also instruments and vocals themselves sound noticeably further back and also somewhat thinner. The XS also just has a bit of a bass treble emphasis, and listening back and forth here, the FiiO just has a cleaner, less artificial or plasticky sounding mid-range and is sounding more warm, not with bass like the XS, but with instruments and vocals. They just sound, and I'm sorry for using weird audiophile vocabulary here, but they just sound more meaty. I guess you could also say full, but not in a bass sense, but in a mid-range sense. So the instruments do not sound thinned out. They do not sound like there's something missing when you stroke guitar. They just sound real and more natural than they do on the XS. And again, because of my musical preferences, I did especially notice this with electric guitars, where the FiiO sounds more forward with less washed out body, but instead with a clean foundation and with better attack. It just sounds really well and refined. I feel like I'm thrashing the XS here. It still has a fantastic mid-range, and it is still a top contender for an open back, especially around €300. But for me, the FiiO has a perfect, not boring neutral mid-range. I guess so it's in the nature of things, it will sound more natural. The XS just has a more, yeah, not really saying V-shaped tuning with more of a wow factor in your music. I'm talking about treble. Treble is something that can be divisive with many planar headphones because many listeners, and I include myself here, do hear something of a sheen and just a slight unnaturalness in the higher frequencies with quite a few planars, which can also get fatiguing. The FT1 Pro does not really do that. It does also not exhibit any sibilance, so you do not have annoying sharp vocal peaks, and it's also not really edgy with instruments. It just has a very cohesive and still slightly bright, but also not fatiguing to listen to profile here. The whole area from 5000 Hz to 15,000 Hz does not really have a lot of peaks that could push the direction of some instruments into an unnatural territory, which you get with some headphones where cymbals will jump at you, or again, vocal sibilance. The FiiO sounds just really balanced here and follows the neutral, smooth, but very transparent sound that the mid-range already showed without sacrificing the presence area of female vocals or the overtones of pianos or other instruments, which can easily sound blunted. And if you're using headphones which do that as a mixing tool, it may force you to falsely push these frequency up because they just do not sound right. And again, the FiiO is pretty good here and does not do that. That also means you get snare drums that sound aggressive and definitely enough presence of cymbals and hi-hats, but they always keep below the line of being exhausting or too pronounced. It's a neutral but smooth sound profile from the deep bass up into the upper treble. As I already mentioned before, the XS has more of an emphasis in bass and treble, which is noticeable. The higher frequencies are boosted, but to be honest, I was expecting way worse and way more of an exhausting emphasis reading some reviews before. And it's really not like that. It's an airy sound with loud cymbal crashes, the occasional sibilance and sharpness here and there, but I found it to be completely fine. There is an emphasis there, but it's not over the top. And I did like the on-top clarity here that again contributes to that more epic sound profile, which is different from the FiiO, which almost sounds a bit more relaxed in comparison with that, excluding the mid-range forwardness with some instruments and vocals. Since the XS is basically elevated from 7000 Hz onwards, you have more of that ethereal sound with especially female vocals and generally more sheen in your music, which I do not mean in a bad way here, but listening to DXS, you can tell it just sounds a bit different. Talking about staging and the technical abilities here, I found the FT1 Pro to be very detailed. It was really easy to hear small things, and for a planar, it's also not sounding too compressed and it's still pretty natural. And if you're listening to the XS right next to it, the XS even seems to be a tiny bit muddy, which it not really is. But the FT1 Pro sounds just so much more controlled, where the XS again ventures into that epic feel of a song. And in an A-B comparison, it was easier for me to decipher songs with the FT1 Pro. But there's not that much of a difference. It's just you have to get used to the tuning, and then both of these are really, really resolving. But everything is just very well separated on the FiiO and controlled, and even with complex tracks, it's well layered. I have to say this again, do not get me wrong, the XS is very good here too. It's just that the FiiO with its more neutral sound makes analyzing music easier. Stage is relatively wide, maybe somewhat above average, but the XS is the absolute king here with an openness that all egg-shaped Hifimans are famous for. And I repeat myself here for the fifth or sixth time. Listening to music with the XS, you get this wow factor, you get that epic music enjoyment. I actually do not really like the word epic, but it's pretty fitting to describe the XS here with that word. And it's just that the FiiO has a different sound profile in that case. So, conclusion. Well, to be honest, I can't really say if one is better than the other. What I can say is that the FiiO is absolutely a top contender in this price range, and some listeners will like the FT1 Pro more than the Edition XS. Honestly, tuning wise, they are for different groups of listeners, whereas the FiiO ventures more into that neutral, still enjoyable sound. I still really like the bass here. It's so clean and it's so strong. Really nice what they did here. And the rest of the sound is also really thought through and well made. But the Edition XS just has this really wide stage with this big sound and a bass that fills out a lot of space, but you can still tell where all the small things are and you can still hear everything in your music. The sound profile is just less analyzing, but more enjoying. And the FiiO just tends to be more analyzing while still being enjoyable for the group of people that like that. But for the average consumer, I would still say that the Edition XS is maybe better because they will be overwhelmed with how open this thing sounds. Yeah, it's just two different headphones for different groups of music enjoyers or listeners. I do have to say, I can see the FT1 Pro being used in a professional setting. If you would have to choose between those two, I would not go for the Edition XS for mixing music. I mean, it would work. Obviously, it's a really good headphone. And but if you could choose between those two, I would think that the FT1 Pro is better for just mixing music production wherever you need an open back there. So that's it for this review. I hope I could be of some help here. And if you have any additional comments to make, be it good or bad, or additional information or whatever, just tell me in the comments. And yeah, see you next time. Goodbye.